So we'll let everybody come in here, Cynthia, and then we'll get started, okay?
That sounds good. I'll just follow your lead, Chris.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started here shortly. Just waiting for everybody to join here. Okay. All right. Well, I think numbers are starting to level out here, Cynthia, so we'll get started. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Halifax Chamber's Business Support Series webinar. So thank you again for joining us. My name is Chris Mann. I'm the Chamber's Corporate Partnership Specialist and your host this morning. Our speaker will discuss project management tools and easy best practices. And I skipped something, so I'm just going to say today we're learning how to focus on delivering practical projects that reflect your business strategy. Our speaker will discuss project management tools and easy best practices for them. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions for our presenter. And when we get to the Q&A, feel free to type any questions in the chat box below. We'll be reviewing those frequently. Our presenter today is Cynthia Giles, Senior Project Manager with Capstone Project Solutions. Cynthia is recognized as a highly energetic and effectual leader with 20+ years leading business process improvements and managing projects across industry types. She's credited with leading projects of all sizes totaling over $234 million in value. Welcome, Cynthia. Thanks so much for joining, and I'll pass it along to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris. That's wonderful. Yeah, I stopped counting after 230 some odd million. I figured after that, we didn't need to count anymore.
No, it's just so much, right?
After that, it stopped really making a difference. Anyway, hello, everybody. And just a quick introduction about myself. As Chris mentioned, I am a senior project manager. I've worked with very small companies of 3 members, not-for-profit teams, and very big companies that have 1,200 members, and they're doing businesses across borders. I really enjoy the variety of it, but I find that when I work with the medium and small size companies, we seem to make the biggest difference. We seem to offer the best amount of change and all kinds of information that can actually practically be applied very quickly. So I really enjoy these engagements and want to thank you very much for joining me. There's a fundamental wealth of knowledge to share with you. We're going to touch on just a little bit this morning, but I hope that you will learn enough that when you might see another member of your own team or a colleague in your industry and they're struggling a little bit with their projects, you'll come back to some of the tips that you learn here today and feel free to share it with them. I really do believe in a community of practice. Let's share what we know. Let's just grow standard best practices for good project delivery. And as always, I believe in real projects. So when we do a project or we do a study and we invite the involvement of our members and our stakeholders, I don't think we do them any justice when that study or that project then sits on a shelf. We really want to get to the real delivery of an item, a product, a process that actually gets applied. So that's where the magic happens. And I invite you all to have the same kind of knowledge and commitment to real projects and real application. So what we're going to cover off today is what we call projects on fire. And yes, when you hear fire and smoke, it's not generally a good thing. But in our case, it's actually going to be a great thing. And we're going to teach you how to use the FIRE acronym to keep you focused and prioritized and focused on the right things that make a change for your business. We will talk about some of the tools that we use, and I will give you some examples about prioritizing and focusing your projects. And then we'll look at some of the key documents that project managers typically use. And I'll steer you left or right about, how to avoid some of the pitfalls, what happens when things get too big and too cumbersome. And I'll give you some examples of things that are just a bit more palatable, maybe a little bit easier for smaller teams to manage without getting lost in the weeds and the nuances of a very big document. We'll talk about tools that make the job easier for collaboration. And I want to make a point of saying at this point, the tool is the end of all of your thinking and your planning. The tool is what happens and makes it easier to deliver as a team. But the tool is not your starting point. So we're going to really pay attention to prioritization, focus, documentation, and then find the right tool that helps us deliver with our team. And at the end, we're going to sum up a couple of key points that really help put a stop to those projects that just seem to want to go on forever. They never seem to reach that end date, even though we may have stated that there is an end date, and they just go on and on. So that's what we're going to cover off today. And what I'm going to ask you to do, just as we get started on our first slide, is if you could, in your chat, give me a sense of how comfortable you are with projects. And then at the end of the next slide, I'll just ask Chris to summarize them for me. So if you could, put a 3 in the chat if you are a wizard with projects. If you feel like that lion tamer in the circus and projects just roll over and play ball and they do everything you want them to do, please just give us a 3 in the chat. But if you feel like projects are still a little bit tricky, you absolutely could use some extra help. You feel like you've got a good handle on them, but every once in a while you get a nasty surprise. Just put a 2 in your chat, and then put a 1 in the chat if you find that you are absolutely intimidated and terrified by projects. And when someone uses the word project, you feel like you're entering into this void and you really don't know what's going on. I would like to be able to gear the rest of our presentation along your 1, 2s, and 3s. Thanks very much. All right, so what are practical projects? And again, we're going to use that FIRE acronym. So practical projects are feasible, impactful, real, and efficient. And let's just open up each of those pieces right now. So feasible. When we go through our planning process with our teams, we want to make sure that the approach is realistic. And it's so easy when we are enamored with our project and what we're delivering that we get a bit into the honeymoon stage where it seems like anything's possible. We can do it all. And then we build out these really great expectations for our team about what they're going to deliver. But when the rubber meets the road and you actually start to do the work, we might find at that point that no, we're asking too much of our team. You know, we don't have key components in place before we actually get started. And so we can't get started. Or we dreamt too much and it's just not going to work for us. So absolutely, your approach in delivering either your product or your process, or even just idealizing what that project will actually deliver at the end, needs to be realistic and achievable with your team. And we often find that engaging your team as you decide what is the right approach makes the biggest difference. And I will talk to you about some tips later on about defining the right approach for your project delivery. Impactful. I think this is the biggest one. If you can't tick I through your FIRE process, you need to go back to the drawing board. Your projects, I'm sure, are great. And over the long run, you may find that you've got a couple that in a couple of years are really going to make a big difference to your business. But we're worried about the projects that should be making an impact to your business right now. If you have a business strategy for 1 year, you want to focus on the projects that are going to operate, grow, or transform your business today, not in 2 years. And if you're starting to focus in 2 years on those projects, you're missing the ball about where your teams need to focus right now. And so impactful, I think, is it should be bold. It should be times 10 size of all the other letters in FIRE. You absolutely need to make sure that your projects are making a business, an impact to your business right now. Real, again, going back to some of those vision statements in the earlier slide, you want something to come out of your projects, a real process, a real product that your clients can get around, or a real something that again, your team can get around. There's something they can hang on, it's something that they can use, it's something that they can sell or deliver, but it's tangible. And then lastly, but not least, is efficient. You want to be able to use just the right amount of documentation and just the right combination of solutions and tools to deliver your product or your process. When your team feels like they are underwater just trying to keep up with documentation, you're wasting time and you're wasting money. So we're going to find that right balance of documentation and the tools that we use. And there are all kinds of different ways to bolt things together. But bottom line, if you're not using every minute in just the right way, then you're going to be wasting time and money. And I don't know about you, but as a business owner, time and money, that's gold. So I want to make $1 work like 5, and I want my 5 minutes to work like 10 minutes. All right, Chris, can we just get a poll on what came up for the 1, 2, 3s in the chat, please?
Yeah, it was overwhelming twos. Everyone put two in that answer.
Okay, great. So maybe you guys can give me some tips too. We can share back and forth. That's fantastic. All right, do we have any ones at all, Chris?
No, we didn't. Just twos.
Just twos. All right, good. Well, then we're all in a really good starting place. So let's move on to when projects are not practical. When you start to feel like you can't deliver this project, or even at the idea and the planning stage, you're going, I have no idea how we're going to do this. You're obviously heading into that it's not a practical project arena. So when we start to find that our projects are very cumbersome to plan, they are taking thousands of lines of activities, or your documents just seem to be 40 pages long, I'm going to say to you at this stage, unless you're delivering a rocket ship to the moon or you're building a ship, you probably don't need that level of documentation. There's an easier way to get through it. When you're dreaming for something further out in your organizational future, it's not a practical project for today. Again, we want to really focus on what's going to make a difference for our business right now. Now, this one catches me a lot. I'm a dreamer. I love to have different project ideas running around in my head, but they're not necessary. They're not really things that my business needs absolutely in this minute. I can do without them for a little bit. But as a dreamer, I tend to always have a lot of nice to haves in the bucket list, and my team will pull me back and say, no, we can do without that right now. Your $5 needs to work like 10. We're going to go and focus over here. So I rely on my team to keep me out of the N category. And theories and ideas that never move past discussion. Now, this is one of my pet peeves, I think, is when we get into discussions and that's all they ever are conversations after conversations and meetings after meetings. We really need to be able to put a bucket around this and control how much time we spend just talking about the idea versus actually starting to think about, now what's the thing that we're going to deliver? What is our scope for that delivery? How are we going to deliver it? Who's going to be involved, and so on. And we'll get to some of those other elements later on. So if you can go through your fire checklist and you can go through this can't checklist, then you should be able to very clearly identify for the projects in your strategy this year, which ones are practical and which ones should be parked for another time. So in summary, what is a practical project? The real delivery of an impactful process through a feasible approach that effectively delivers results. And that's it in a nutshell. And I'd invite you to take a screenshot of this right now, print it out, post it all around your office, and challenge your team members to make sure that what they're working on are actually practical projects that will drive your business today. All right, we're going to move on into the next section now about prioritization and focus. I'm going to talk about one approach. I know there's a ton of different ways to actually do prioritization and to focus your projects, and that would take a lot more time than we have this morning. But I'm going to talk about one of those quick tips and tricks that we use just when we really want to focus our strategy quickly and make sure that we are moving in the right direction for our business. It starts with knowing your budget for the year. You really do have to understand the total pot of money that you've got to work with over 3 categories. Operating your business, which I call keep the lights on, growing your business, which is about consumer awareness and making a bigger impact in the market, and transforming your business. This is that caterpillar to a butterfly. You were one thing, and now you're going to grow into something a little different that gives you a whole bunch of new opportunities. And we group our projects into those 3 buckets. It really helps us focus. We then break down the category of project or the list of projects into each of these categories. So we might have 3 in the operate arena, we might have 2 in grow, we might have 1 in transform. And knowing the cost of each of those projects in those buckets, I should be adding up to and not exceeding my budget for the year. Now we're going to go over an example of this in the next slide. But so number 1, know your budget. Number 2, break down your projects over 3 categories. Number 3, calculate the sum of the projects in each of those categories, and then prioritize within those categories. So for the projects in operate, which one has to happen first this year? Which one is the most important? is going to deliver the biggest bang for buck, will really set our teams up for success, and so on and so forth. Chris, can I pause here and just ask if there's any questions from our participants at this time?
Absolutely. So there's nothing in the Q&A box as of yet, but I will, if you'd like, I can stop if there's something that comes up when you take a bit of a break in between slides.
Why don't we do that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when we don't prioritize and when we don't focus our projects over the course of this current year, we might find that we tend to do rework later on in the year, and that will cost you time and money. So that's what we're trying to avoid. This is an example, and I've just used a budget of $240,000. This might sound like a lot of money, and by all means, those budgets can be much, much smaller or much, much bigger, but the process is the same. So in this example for Operate, I know I've got 5 staff salaries, I've got my leasing expenses, and I've got all of my other operational stuff that is going to chew up a chunk of change. I know I want to grow this year, and we had planned certain projects. In the course of doing this review, I've already taken one off because it exceeded the budget that I had allotted for the growth. We have a marketing strategy that we're rolling out. We've got a media campaign. We're going to do 2 trade shows, and we're bringing in a new professional resource. This one has a star because in our books, when that new resource joins the team for the first year, that is considered a project. You know, how we develop that resource, how we onboard them, what sort of roles and responsibilities will they have. You know, we treat the development of that resource and all of the stuff that goes around making that resource successful as a project. And in year 1, it will go in the growth category. But in year 2, they'll just be part of, again, 5 staff salaries. This will bump to 6, and my operating number might bump a little bit. We also have a little bit of transformation happening this year. We're bringing in some new products, and we are doing some brand development. And so when I looked at the product or projects in each of our buckets, and I added them up, and then I took that as a percentage of the total, I was able to see, okay, you know, 20% transform, 50% grow, 30% operate. And it was a little bit of a gut litmus test. Does this feel right? Do I feel like we're in a growth stage for our company? And I have to tell you that, yes, absolutely. I think this is absolutely representative of where the company will be focusing this year. This is then reviewed with the team. Do they also agree that this is where we need to focus this year? Is it in growth? And if they have a difference of opinion, it's worth conversation. The important thing is that your team is behind you and they understand what your thinking is and where we will be focusing over the next 12 months. Over the next few slides, I'm going to show you some more examples about staying focused and building out your plan, incorporating your team and collaborating with them, and then staying the course throughout the project. There are a ton of tools on the internet, and even not even automated tools. You could be using Excel spreadsheets, but you could be using pen and paper if that's all you've got. The idea on a project roadmap is to take the projects that we've just talked about, the projects over the course of your year, and build them out across a calendar. You want to see how they rack and stack. Now, this one was done with Excel. This one, I believe, is done with PowerPoint timeline. And there's so many other ways to build out your roadmap. But again, the key is, what's my year looking like? Am I front loading all my projects in the first quarter? Oh my gosh, what am I doing to my team? And by the way, I know we've got a budget, but that budget probably comes in installments through the year. Am I going to be over budget in my first quarter because I put all my projects at the front? It also gives you an opportunity to say, you know, was I right in the prioritization of what I thought came first, second, and third? Maybe first really is third, because when I see it in this order, it tweaks something to say, there's a dependency. There's something popping out of this project that really needs to happen before this project actually starts to kick off. And then we can actually work things around and move it until a roadmap makes sense. This is another point of collaboration with your team, and everybody needs to be aware of what your intention is on how you will deliver your projects over time. You can review this every quarter and make sure that you're A, on track, and B, things are still making sense. Things change. You may have the best plan in the world. It may be rock solid when you start, but your environmental influences, your government regulations, God knows what else, may influence the actual delivery of that project. And so things will shift over time. Doing a quarterly review of your roadmap is just good practice. Do we have any questions about the roadmap from anybody?
No, nothing in there yet, Cynthia. I think
Okay.
everyone's just listening intently here, so you're good.
I will keep rolling then until you put your hand up, Chris.
Perfect.
Okay. The next thing we like to do after you have your roadmap is start to actually break down your projects. And for those of you on the call with your PMPs, you'll understand exactly what I talk about when I say charter. And for those of you who are working towards it, and you may have your CAPMs, you're going to understand this. And for those of you who don't have any of your credentials, not to worry. I'm sure you probably understand when I say a project charter versus a project plan, but we're going to define it a little bit more for you. When I'm working to companies, I find that the project charter and what we have in the charter shifts. Different cultures and different business strategies and different ways of working define what documents do and do not contain. And I'm all for what works for your company needs to be in place with your company. But there are certain criteria that really should be part of that initial documentation. And I'm not saying write 12 pages when one page will do. If one page will do your one page, but tick these elements here to make sure that you've got all of them in, and for really, really good reason. When you even have a one-page charter, if I was to transition off one project and over to another as a project manager, it makes it so much easier for me to onboard that next project manager or that next team member or that next business leader to explain to them, why are we doing this project? And the charter is all about what are we going to deliver. It frames out and puts the project in a nice, neat box. So as you can read here, background is why are we even bothering? What kind of impact will this make to the business? Is this a grow item? And are we really hoping to achieve X, Y, Z? And those would be your objectives. And then following from that, what is the scope? What is the actual work we want to do? And some people will think in terms of deliverables and others will just think in terms of work, and neither is right or wrong for your business. Now we can, go into more detail about that, and I will in training sessions, but this morning I'm going to tell you, as long as you're writing out what you think you will do as part of the project, it is better than absolutely not having written out what you think you will do. Defining your scope means also turning it on its head and saying what you will not do. And this one is important and sometimes overlooked. If you don't define where you will not go with a project specifically, you might find that you will expand your scope unintentionally later in the project. Let's see if I can give you an example. So for a recent project portfolio project management tool that we're implementing, we had previously put in an earlier version of the tool with a client, and they loved it. But it was really good for their team and their team only. The client's now expanding into a portfolio enterprise where they want the entire organization to use the same sort of tool. The caveat to this, the out of scope element is we are not going to retrofit team one. They're very happy with their tool. They absolutely don't want us to come back and revisit their work, their practices, or their processes. So specifically stated out of scope is any work to the portfolio for team one. So I hope that helps you define that. Now, what might happen later on is somebody may say, this is an absolutely fabulous tool. Team one really needs to do this. Let's go. And we come back to out of scope and say, no, specifically team one said, do not touch them. Now that may be a conversation at the leadership table, but I'm not wasting that time having that conversation until leadership tells me to revise that out of scope element. I keep the team on course, we stay on track, we stay focused. Milestone dates. These are the key dates that you need to observe throughout the project. And milestone dates are ideas during your planning or your chartering, that they become more firm after you've finished your project management plan. Specifically what those key dates are. But at this early stage, you have an idea of what some of those specific key dates are that you need to observe. And I would absolutely write them down here. It does help with the planning process. If somebody says, I need XYZ to happen by April 13th, you know that come hell or high water while you're planning, you will do everything you can to observe that April 13th date for that particular piece of work. Budget, I think, goes without any explanation. You need to know how much money you have to work with, and so does your team. I like to break it down a bit more. Is it a material resource? Is it a person resource? Is it an event thing that we're doing? What kind of components make up our budget? It just helps with tracking later on. The team, who is going to join us on their project, and what will their role be? Now, we are not getting into the detail about how we're going to communicate with them, with what frequency or any of that. We won't be doing assessments in a charter. That's way down the line. That's in planning. But right now, we're just really interested in who will be joining us and what is their role. Are they there as a subject matter expert, or are they actually going to be physically delivering a piece of work? And exit criteria. How do we move from being a project where things are very fluid to being in operations where it absolutely needs to work? Some organizations have checklists that they follow, that their IT teams then say, yep, I understand. Yes, I can support that. Okay, you're good to go to move it into a production environment. So if you're not working with IT, maybe you've got a different list of exit criteria that allows your sponsor to say, I agree, you've met all my requirements. Yes, this is exactly what I asked for. Okay, we're good to go live. Figure out what your exit criteria is, make a list, turn it into a checklist. And success criteria, these are your metrics for success. How do you know when you've achieved your project and all of those objectives that you set out to achieve? Give yourself some targets. Maybe it's specific. If you were to do a marketing delivery or a trade show, in the previous slide, we were going to achieve 2 trade shows. And I would like to see 5 clients from each trade show and at least 100 Encore subscriptions. I know I'm making them up, but you and your team will define your success criteria at this point. Again, you need to have something to measure your progress against, so that when you sign off on your project and you go live, you can look back to those expected benefits and you can start to measure whether or not you've achieved them. Assumptions, these are things we know to be true or we think are true, but they influence how we plan our project. And so when somebody says, and why did you plan it that way? We can go back to our assumptions and say, well, because we were told ABC was in place. And now everybody understands the thinking behind the planning of the project. And the constraints, restrictions or limitations on the scope, the budget, the team engagements. So constraints are the things that you might consider handcuffs. You cannot change them. These are your brick walls around your project, and you don't pass go. Risks, this is the early evaluation of what you think might cause this project not to be successful. Now, all of this stuff we talk about in a charter is about what you're going to be delivering and some early considerations for how you will plan your project. And when you get into the planning of the project, all of this becomes very much more detailed. You really elaborate on it, and we'll go into that in more detail in a sec. So on the right, what I've given you is an example of a one-page charter. And like I said, there are much, much more detailed examples, depending on your company, depending on your team culture, depending on what your expectations are for defining what a project will do, that will shape your charter document. All I'm going to ask is that you have one. Planning your document means elaborating on things that come out of your charter. If your charter says what you're going to do and what you should consider, your plan is how you're going to do it and how you're going to observe those earlier considerations. There's a couple of different ways to go about this, but all of it includes conversation with your team. There's no one project manager that can plan a project from A to Z without input from their stakeholders. And then again, the conversation about, well, what is the stakeholder can be a very long conversation, can also be a very short conversation. Again, that's something for another time. But having your participants identified in your charter starts your stakeholder group and starts you understanding who's going to be involved in which elements of your project at what time. So your project plan will elaborate on things that are in your charter. It will document how you're going to do the work, who will be involved, what's the actual approach for doing the work, what pops out at the end, what are the deliverables, and who needs to sign off on it. When you plan your project, you can do 40, 100, 1,000-page documents, depending on the size of your project. And you know, having a fully defined index keeps you on track. And we have templates that will give you all kinds of amazing detail. And I'm sure you have a couple of templates in your own organizational document management repositories as well. What we find lately is that the teams really want to be involved, but they don't have time or interest in writing and reading a 100-page document or even a 40-page document. So at Capstone, what we've been developing and working with is a PowerPoint slide. It's one slide per work activity. We talk about what we're doing, who's going to do it, the approach, the deliverables, the approvers. And this is our discovery. This is our planning mechanism. And then what we do is we take this work and we build it out into a proper project schedule. But that whole conversation about how we're going to plan the project is done with the team, one slide at a time. And we find that this seems to be more, the team just has more appetite for participating than going through a 40-page document or, you know, a long Gantt chart and building on the fly. Next comes your schedule of activities. So you had your charter defining what you were doing, your plan, how you were going to do it. Now you take the components of that plan and you build it out into some sort of scheduling engine. I've seen this done in Excel and I've seen it work extremely well. And I've seen this done in any number of ways. But I really love it when you find a very simple tool that your team can actually engage in with you to have visibility to what did we say we were going to do? Can I filter for me and see who's responsible for it? Do I know when it starts? Do I know when I'm supposed to be done? Can I see how we're moving along over time? And where is that in the overall scheme of that month or that quarter that we're tracking? So again, there's no one tool. It's about finding the right tool that works for you and making sure that you've got the key information pieces that your team needs to see. Being able to change out columns in a tool is great if your team may say, you know, I really need to see what's my budget on each line item as we go. Okay, you know, pop that information in. But absolutely make a schedule of activities work for your team. And you may find that the content in your schedule changes team over team, project over project. Depending on what you're working on and who you're working with, they may be interested in seeing different pieces of information. How do you present that to them? Budget and expense tracking, everybody's love-hate relationship. This one is essential to do and very hard sometimes to manage. Excel spreadsheets are fantastic and are used very, very well. When they are a standalone document, though, the only person who really has an idea about what's happening in that budget and expense tracker is the owner of the document. And unless it's opened up in team meetings, nobody can actually really see what's going on. Now that we have the lovely land of SharePoint, we can have collaboration and visibility to our documents, which is fantastic. But again, there are some limitations to using things like an Excel spreadsheet. The more complicated it gets, the less other people can actually update it and keep it on track. And when it breaks, it takes a little bit more to put it back together. So again, I'm going to recommend that you go and find a tool that is easy to manage, easy to apply, that if you were away for a week or a day, somebody else can pick it up and make the changes in your place as your representative. And that is easy to report on for your leadership. So what I've got here is an example of budget management in our tool Encore. And coming in and bringing in the initial information is very important, but it's very straightforward. And then how we actually keep that up to date as we incur actual costs, again, is very straightforward and easy. And the engine's doing all the work. And then what we see, the reports that pop out at the end, there's various types. But again, leadership can come in at any time and say, hey, I wonder how Cynthia's doing on that project. What the heck happened over in March? She's over budget. let me call Cynthia and find out, or actually better yet, let me click on that and get some detail behind why she's over budget before I call and yell at her. Maybe she did good. I don't know. Anyway, so the point of this one is for budget and expense tracking. Again, find a tool that works for you and your team. If it's Excel, great. If it's Word calculations, that's fine, a little harder to do. If it's an online tool, that's terrific. But absolutely give your team visibility so they can also follow along and see how the budget is progressing over the course of your project. I think the theme these days is collaborate, 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 sharing information and making it visible and transparent to everybody, not just your leadership. The next thing that I would absolutely recommend, and I'm skipping over big chunks, but these are the essential elements for a practical project, is manage your changes and know the cost of the change. When I work with some of our smaller clients, we're so used to doing many things all at once. We've got 10 hats on and we're running a mile a minute. And when we're on the fly, we may have a plan in front of us to say we were going to do 1, 2, and 3, but we're in the middle of it and suddenly, you know what, we should also do 4, 5, and 6. And you are in the moment and you just start doing, and before you know it, you're spending money that you hadn't planned on spending either at all or at that particular time in your project. And what I would recommend is you just take a moment to breathe, step back for a second every time you feel like you're deviating from your plan or your scheduled activities, and just say, what is the impact to my budget and to my team if we make that change right now? Do I need to make that change, or is that a nice to have? Does it really bring value, or am I just enamored with it? And when you go through the thinking, you'll actually find that, you know what, maybe that change isn't the right thing to do right now. We're going to stay the course, or absolutely, that is absolutely the right decision to make. We're going to make that change. We're going to communicate why we're making that change. We're going to understand the cost of making that change, both in terms of time, but material resources as well. And then we're going to implement the change. Oh, and by the way, we're going to track what happened as a result of making that change. Did we get the expected results? How you do it again is entirely up to you. It could be a form on Word. It could, again, be a nice tool. But whatever you do, understand the cost of making that change and what it means for your team. Is it more time on task? Do you have to go buy something new? Does it bump anything out that you weren't expecting to have bumped out? Understand the change, communicate the change, and then again, stay the course. All right, the right tools. More often than not, I get engagements from clients because they're saying, I saw this tool and I think it would really help us do a great job at work. And so they're thinking with the things that would make them efficient. And that's not wrong. It's a great way to go in when you're trying to be more efficient and make your 5 minutes work like 10 minutes. What we want to do, though, is find the tools that make the most sense for your business and how your team works and the kind of information you need to track and manage. If scheduling your work is all you're cared about, you're not going to go and look for this fancy tool that does Uber resource management and availability tracking. But if you need to do scheduling of your work, resource management, and tracking, you're not going to settle for those off-the-shelf products that cost you $12 a month and give you barely anything at all to work with just because they're cheap. So we're going to find the right tool for your team, the way you work, and the kind of information that you want to capture and manage. There's 3 buckets or categories of these kinds of tools, and I'll just go over them very quickly with you. The plug and play, these are the off-the-shelf products that we find on the market today. These are things like projectmanager.com, which I've used, by the way, and it's fabulous. Asana, I have a love-hate relationship. Monday.com, yeah, I could go on. There's a few. They are ready to go. You give your credit card and you're off to the races. It's on-demand training and it's, you know, quick and easy, and you can just go. The limitation is that you may not always get all the features that your team needs. The ones that they typically don't have are good resource management or the good financial management. And sometimes the reporting is limited or needs to be, you need to have a specialized guru in-house in order to get your reports out properly. I do find you quickly outgrow the tool. But in a moment when you need something, this is a great starting point. I'm going to jump over to the end for now. The other side of that coin are the full implementations of a tool where it is exactly what you need. And these are the tools that are built specifically for your team. There's configuration to make it exactly what you want in every way conceivable, but they can be quite expensive. They are hard to stand up. More often than not, you need to have a dedicated team member to actually manage and administer this for your team. Training is essential, and not just at the beginning, but ongoing throughout, so that there's good adoption through the cycle. And excuse me, it does take time to learn and to implement. So although these are wonderful, not everybody has deep pockets and not everybody has the time to actually put them in place. Chris, I see your hand up.
Yes, I had a question here for you, Cynthia. So what are your thoughts on Asana? I've been using Monday, but wondering about alternatives.
All right, so Monday and Asana are worlds apart. Monday is very easy, very easy. Asana, you would need to have somebody really comfortable digging into the background administration of that tool in order to build out specific reports. The resourcing functions and features are not well developed yet. They're coming, but they're not there. I find it a bit confusing for the document management of a tool and the project management. It's not intuitive. Asana is not my favorite, but that's me. And I'm one user. So what I would recommend is go and get a demonstration. Make sure before you go into your demonstration that you've highlighted the areas that you are absolutely interested in seeing. And if they don't offer those areas or they don't offer them to your satisfaction, move on. There are so many tools on the market. There is one out there for you, and you do not need to settle. And if you need help, that's what we do. We help you find the right tools.
Got another question here for you, Cynthia, if you're all right with that.
Yeah.
Should it be the project manager who implements and manages the solutions, or can it be another team member?
When we're talking about a tool implementation, more often than not, okay, let's talk about this one first. More often than not, it's the project manager that goes to the owner and says, hey, I found this great tool. Can I have the Visa card? I want to go buy it. And the owner says, sure, let me know how it goes after 30 days. When your trial is up, we'll make a decision about whether or not we're going to keep it. In that case, it is the PM. When we jump over to this one, the full implementation, this is a much bigger decision. This is really leadership saying, I think we need something because I'm not getting the right reports or the right information from my project team. I have no idea how our strategy is rolling out. I need more visibility. And sometimes it's a bottom-up demand. The project manager and the teams are saying, we can't work in Excel over here, Word over there, somewhere over here. We need something all in one place. Please give us a solution. And so you might find there's a bottom-up demand or a top-down demand, but the purchasing at this point is generally through procurement, and you would have an implementation partner work with your PM because they are complex to stand up. All right, I've got 16 minutes. Is it okay if I keep going? I'm happy to answer any more questions on this, and you can always contact me outside of this seminar. We can talk about it some more.
Yeah, I think you keep going, Cynthia. That's great. And then we'll end with questions. Go ahead.
Sure. Sounds good. All right, this little sucker right here is new. This one is a growing offering. And this is where we at Capstone ended up. So the hybrid takes those third-party products that are doing really, really well, that offer a lot of the good solutions and functionality. And they look for the partners over here that are very complex and hard to stand up, and they say, you know what? I'm going to take the hit on the implementation for my community or for my groups. And so they'll stand up a project platform with full functionality, and they charge a subscription. So you pay a little bit more, but you get absolutely everything. You get your full Office 365 with all of your applications, Outlook, Word, SharePoint, you name it, you've got it. Teams, you get all of your project management functionality, and I mean everything from A to Z. You're not giving up anything or sacrificing at all. More often than not, you get real-time training as opposed to go over here to my training can and pick the thing and hopefully you understand it. So I find it's like the best of both worlds. And this is where Capstone ended. We were not happy making sacrifices on what we thought we needed. We were not happy having to spend tons and tons of money with our clients to stand up very expensive, complex things that they just felt lost in. And so we landed here, and that's an Encore product that we offer. And so that would be a whole nother conversation. But you can keep an eye out for hybrid combinations. Not a lot out there right now, but it's certainly growing. All right, so as a quick snapshot for a hybrid tool, this one is project scheduling engine on Office 365 platform. You have a work area for your resources so that they understand all of the work specifically assigned to them. You have the project center where all of the projects across the organization are available and visible. Each project has its basic charter information, basic costing information. This is the landing page, and a status on how it's proceeding and where are some of those areas of concerns we should pay attention to. And there's levels of detail behind all of this. And it has a fully visible scheduling engine for every resource so they can come in and see how are we proceeding across our projects. Now, this little lady over here, Mariana, would then hop into her work IQ and specifically look at her tasks, her issues, her lessons learned, things that are unique to her and the projects and the work that she's been assigned to deliver. This is what you're looking for. Whether it's Encore or not, you're looking for a tool that speaks to your team members, that speaks to your organization, that gives you a dashboard, that allows you to see the detail when you want to. All right, wrapping up in 13 minutes or less, and hopefully we'll have some time for some questions. Projects that don't stop. They're the projects that I guarantee you did not apply your FIRE principles to. If you don't have that impact I ticked off, if they weren't relevant and real and feasible, and if you don't actually have everything planned out so that we understand what the expected results are, we're going to be running into projects that never end. And I've been challenged, and people will say, well, I gave it an end date. I knew when it was supposed to stop. And then I would look at them and say, yeah, but did it? And why not? Oh, well, because our approach wasn't feasible, so we kept going. We found a new approach and it just rolled over. We're going, aha. So as soon as we start to work through the FIREs, we understand why the projects are not stopping when they should be stopping. And we can start to put a bigger box around it. I mean, there are a ton of reasons why a project doesn't end, but most importantly is, you know what, we kept going because we found we had a better idea of how to do it, so we made a change and our approach adjusted, or we realized it wasn't going to be impactful right now, but it will be next month, so we kept going, or and so on. And so there's lots of conversations about why those projects never stop. All right, so in summary, impactful projects, it's a clear vision across your organization, not just you. Really well thought out plans that, again, are shared and available to everybody who wants to come in and see what those projects are intending to deliver. It's teams that have access to information so they can very quickly tell you how the projects are progressing and give you a heads up when they're veering left or right. We want to stay right down the middle. We want to stay the course. And we have the right tools in place. And for your team, it may be manual tools like Excel and Word and whichever, but it may also be some other efficient tools, and it could be those really quick plug and play third parties. It could be hybrid, or you might be at that point where you need to take a longer look at something a bit more expansive that would then give you longevity over time. So again, at the core of it, you want to be simple and you want to be effective. And that's your practical projects. So I've given a lot of information over the course of today, a ton of stuff. We do break this down into other sessions where we can actually dig into it and really work through some of those best practices that we've talked today. The first one that we offer is either one day or it's 2 sessions over 2 weeks. And I find that that one is the better course. But we dig into the best practices. We do those interactive workshops where we actually look at some practical pieces happening in your business right now and we unpack them together. We apply the worksheets and the case studies to actually do the strategy and the focusing and the prioritization. And then we coach you through your troubles. So you start with one session, you go away with some homework, you come back to the next session, we unpack what the problems are, we coach you through them, and then we finish off with the beginning of your focus and moving into your charter. The 2-day course is the same as one day, but then we break down right through into the full project planning of a project. We'll use a real project that you're dealing with as your example, building out your vision, your scope, building out your charter, helping you with your plan outline, building out a schedule, and we'll show you a couple of different tools and we'll give you hands-on experience with a hybrid just so you can have some taste of what it's like to work with a collaboration environment. And then when you go shopping for your tool, you can really challenge that vendor and say, hey, do you do X, Y, Z? And when they say no, you can say, thank you very much, moving on, because you know somebody else does. But this course, the 2-day, the 5 sessions over 5 weeks, again, is the same format of, you come in, you do your session, you get your homework, you apply it, you come back, you unpack it together with your coach, you do another session, you get some homework, you go and apply it. That one is your best bang for both practical application and learning and money and value. And that is it. We are done. Do we have any questions?
Great. Yeah, so we do have one question here in the Q&A box and several other questions that came in beforehand. So the question in the Q&A, would you please introduce some resources for hybrid?
Are we talking about a tool resource or sorry, are we talking about like a documentation resource or a technical tool resource or a people resource to help you get a hybrid solution?
So that's a good question. So I'm not quite sure. So Helia, if you can put that in the Q&A box, we'll be sure to ask that to Cynthia for a bit more clarity on the question. In the meantime, I do have a question here for myself. When you were mentioning about tools, Cynthia, how often should you review the tools that you're using? Because I feel like a lot of times people get into repetition and routine, that they're using the same thing over and over again. But there may be something out there that is more beneficial that could help you a lot better. How often should you review those tools that you're using?
Okay, well, there's 2 things. So we call it a maturity of practice. One can be your documentation maturity of practice assessment, and the other is the technical maturity practice assessment. But basically, honestly, a rule of thumb is if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. You're spending money you don't need to spend. And that goes back to do what you need to do, not what you want to do. Right. But if your processes are broken, if your templates are not working, if you find you're adjusting them all the time because the information is just not fitting in that template, it's a good time to review both the template, the information, who's filling it out, what's the process through approvals that it goes through, like go back and do an assessment. And the same for your tool. If you're struggling, if it's just not giving you the right visibility and the right reporting, it's time to make a change.
So if that's if it isn't working well, but what if it's something is working well, but you don't know if there's something else out there? Because you mentioned a bunch of tools that I had never heard of. Yeah. And I'm wondering, if we're using something, should we be, and we think it's working well. Yeah. And we're fulfilling our results, we're getting successes out of that, but there might be something better. How often should you check it if it is going well?
All right. So you think that there might be something that's easier to use, would give you better results. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you're still doing well, but you want to know what else is out there. Actually, funnily enough, I'll be doing another talk on that anytime. If you have time and it's not going to cost you money, you might as well go and do a market scan. Go and play. And there's no harm in taking a look at the market. But I would warn that if it's going to cost you resources and money, Chris, that are taking away from the projects that have priority, it's not the right time to do it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Great answer. So focusing on small businesses that don't have a lot of time and focusing on, your prioritize and focus section. How do you get everyone on board to do that? Where, say, the majority of our membership is small businesses, a lot of them don't have the resources in-house to be able to say, okay, we're going to prioritize and focus today, because there's a number of things that are going on. Like, how do you work outside of your business on your business, if that makes sense?
I think so. So if you don't mind, I'm going to try and take an example. It would be a not-for-profit association with
Sure.
association members. Would that be the right?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Okay. So that one, your association memberships each have leaders. They become your steering committee to work with you on the strategy for your not-for-profit. They have the authority to make decisions on behalf of the members within each of their associations. And they must have the authority to have that, be able to come to the steering committee. Together, you frame out what you think the best approach would be. Again, the best way to spend your money, the best projects to focus on, the best sequence to roll them out. And they need to take that back to their association for buy-in. I absolutely believe in collaboration, but I do believe in this concept of, 49% of the vote, 51% of the vote, or you're going to hang up and you'll be in discussion forever. Go and have the conversation with your association memberships, but you as the leader are accountable for the direction and the results of your association. You take 51% of the vote, so you don't stall, and you come back to your steering committee and you keep working it together.
Right. And one question, making a decision when you're a leadership team, say if the project manager is on board and the leadership organization's on board, but how do you worry if you don't have your frontline staff on board? And at the same time, if it's still the right way going forward, how do you get them on board if they're not willing to?
Right. A lot of change management, a lot of love, a lot of coaching.
Right.
Even if they're not on board and they're criticizing you, it's still good information. And taking that information and continuing to work with them, let them know that they have a voice, that you are listening, that you are trying. Show them how you're trying to meet their expectations, even though they're not in love with the direction that you're taking. There's something in there for them. Find that and work with them and get them to continue to have a voice. I find that's the easiest way to bring someone who's offside onside.
Great.
But there is a whole strategy around change management and communication with stakeholders who are not on board with you.
Okay, great. So we got 2 minutes left. I got one more follow-up here too, is you mentioned about tools and you're going out looking at the market, seeing what's the best fit. For your preference, what would be the best tool for small businesses, medium-sized business, and large? And do they change? Is one tool better for small business versus medium versus large? Or is there one tool that's good for all?
Oh my goodness. There's no one tool that's good for all. I wish there was, because I would go buy it and sell it.
Yeah.
And make $1 million. I think for the small businesses, it really comes down to the money. When you're a small not-for-profit or even a small for-profit, you are constrained by your budget. And often that will dictate what tool you have and what you have to learn to live without. Now, there's just a bunch out there, so you could probably get more than what you think. It's just, again, about how much does your budget allow you to use. Medium-sized businesses have a bit more budget leeway, and so the discussion becomes more around what will I accept that tool can do and what will I not accept that it can't do. I find the hybrid tools do work very well for both the small and the medium-sized business. The larger organizations, the more complex organizations, tend to want to go for custom implementations and take the time to actually build them out properly, because they know years down the road they're going to be stuck with this tool. So they are okay to invest the time and money into building out the complex tool.
Okay, great answer. Way to unpack all that. That was good. Great. So
we can feedback from the first, Chris, because I'd love to be able to
Yeah,
answer.
no, yeah, no. So Helia didn't respond, but what we did do, Cynthia, and I'll mention it to our viewers, is we're recording this webinar, and we will be posting it on our YouTube channel. But also, we will be reaching out to all the participants that registered via an email with your contact details. And we welcome them to reach out to you if they have a follow-up question on that as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you
Great.
very much. It was great being able to speak to you this morning.
Okay, well, thanks so much for your time. And again, sadly, we're out of time. And thanks for everyone for attending today's webinar. And Cynthia, you did a great job. And thanks so much for your insight and expertise today. If you're looking for project management solutions, contact Cynthia at Capstone. I just want to welcome everyone to join us for an info session on our export development program, TAP. It's aimed at businesses who are looking to export or grow their exports. The webinar was recorded, as I mentioned today, and will be posted on our YouTube channel shortly. I wish everyone a great day and a great end to your week. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.